Teresa, 45.
Rebecca, 44.
Lisa, 41.
Kata, 38.
Maggie, 45.
Molly, 38.
Josie, 60.
Katie, 44.
Claire, 34.
Samantha, 40.
Marcia, 66.
Welcome to Interwoven Spring Summer Season of 2022. This podcast is dedicated to women taking control of middle life's narrative through story and conversation. Each episode will bring you inspiration, information, and community relevant to middle life. This episode features a conversation between Sam and Claire as they discuss transitioning from managing trauma to healing, boundary setting, being versus doing, taking pause, and authenticity. Remember to hit subscribe so that you can keep coming back and to visit our website so that you can sign up for our newsletter as well as to access more resources. Find us at interwoven.com. That's INTERWOVXN.com.
This is Claire. I'm 34.
This is Samantha. I'm 40. So to get the conversation started, really want to dig into really the origins of our relationship, our dynamic, how we met. So if I would love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So I pinpoint our relationship starting one of the first board meetings that I was able to join for Stellar Collegiate, which was at that point a standalone elementary charter school in Milwaukee, and I was part of the Carmen Network. And I got invited to be on the board, which I was super pumped about. Walking into sitting in imagine kindergarten size, small chairs in a classroom full of joy posters in teeny chairs. I remember walking in and seeing and being introduced to you as the president of the board at that time. I think I remember getting to meet you there. And I think shortly after, we also were at a book donation event for the libraries at Stellar. And that, I think, just sounding like absolute starstruck here, Sam, is one of the first times I got to hear you speak about your story, your connection to Stellar, your connection to education, and what you really give a hoot about. And it was just so clear then that I was glad to be a part of that organization, that board, but also as you as a person I wanted to get to know.
Yeah, and then me and another board member are using crayons and markers, we're being the bad kids in the back of the room as we're still trying to drive and govern the school. I remember.
Yeah, that is the spot. But I think there's just so much joy in that. And it is in the humility of small chairs, it allows us to have a really people-driven space.
Exactly.
So we worked together on that board at a high level governing functions, like you said. But I think we got to take a deeper dive in our relationship when I made the decision to quit my full-time job and start a full-time coaching practice. And I was kind of looking and reaching out to my network to seek wisdom, seek advice, just seek enthusiasm. Mm-hmm. And you were one of the first people that I came to because you've worked in and outside of the box from a corporate setting or an education perspective before. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's when we went from colleagues to friend, mentor blend, I think is how I call it.
Yeah. Just taking it back to when we were on the board for Stellar and I was in that leadership position and working in concert with Melissa, the school leader at the time. And she has, a very strong network in the academia and the education space. And she's like, yeah, we have Claire. I forget the word, but when you're attracted and inspired by intelligence. I was like, oh, I love her questions, or oh, I should have thought of that, or I love that perspective. And I'm just listening the whole time. And that's why I love this type of work and the work that I do in nonprofit and all of that, because I just want to soak up all the new ideas. And for me, that's feeding my gooey center. It's not just the shell of everything. And so I just so appreciated, to your point, the enthusiasm, the passion, the experience, and really the thoughtful approach that you brought in serving these kids and really focusing on how to make our board better to ultimately be better for those, for the mission of the school. So yeah, I've always just really appreciated you. I loved your perspective. Your energy is calming to me. I love our dynamic because we can talk about whatever and I feel lifted afterwards, right? Even if it's work related or it's personal related, we're doing work, we're focusing, but we can still have, levity and have some fun through it. And in regards to when you took the leap and left the stability, if you will, of the full corporate role. And I remember even when you were at TFA and then took a leap, out of academia and then went to corporate. That was a leap. And supporting you and being kind of that quote unquote advisor support system for you when you were going through that. I appreciate when people appreciate me, that perspective, right? It's the reciprocity and giving back and forth, right? And so I'm always in the corner of my fellow women to support them and call it like it is, but also have them call it like it is for me too. When you took the secondary leap, and, even a bigger leap, I would say, in trusting yourself and betting on yourself in how you wanted to grow, what you wanted to contribute. I just applaud that. Taking a bet on yourself is the biggest risk, but the biggest reward as well. When you reach out, you're like, Sam, this is what I'm trying to do. What do I do? And the questions you had, I'm like, ooh, I have ideas, right? It's not always like the end all be all answer, but it's the questions that lead to the other questions that lead to, more of that discerning and kind of more isolated direction.
Yeah, it definitely was a turning point for me. And I think in the wholeness of our relationship, right? To your point, there are certain relationships in life where they are so valuable, so meaningful, but you're not always whole in them, right? Mm-hmm. There's like the agenda and you morph into what needs to happen to move things forward. And then there are other relationships in life where you show up whole. And this is definitely one of those for me. One of the lessons that I had the privilege to learn really early is like, we never do big stuff alone. So that definitely is the driving force that brought me to you and to understand how we can pursue abundance together, how we can support each other. Yeah, it just in the direction of our dreams and what we can make possible in our like collective presence and in our community.
Yeah. And then as you're pursuing different opportunities and building your practice in the community through, different women-led development organizations, I love to see how you're continuing to lean into that and build your business through these different platforms as well. Being able to be that supporter in the corner, if you will, that sponsor in some ways. I'm just so happy to see that for you continue to grow.
Yeah. And, so I support primarily women and teams who are trying to create major change for themselves, right? Transition and transform in some ways the way they're operating. And so I'm thrilled to be talking about this midlife space today. And there's no doubt that I've got a lot of client experiences and stories in my mind, as well as my own. Because I think this is such a pivotal space. I've been hearing lately that 35, 40 range is where big change can come. I think mine maybe came a little bit earlier. But yeah, just so present to our community as you and I enter the conversation about midlife today.
Yeah, just looking back on these last few years, right? It feels like it's fast and slow at the same time. Right? Like when you're in it, you're like, oh, this is like, it feels like forever. But when you look back, you're like, oh my God, that went so fast. And things start to pivot, like small little iterative pivots here and there. And I read something the other day, like when you're just taking baby steps are not necessarily like the small steps. Baby steps are like, you are unsure, you are not balanced, you're learning something new. So this idea of baby steps, meaning I'm just taking one small little step and it's all fine. That's not the same, because when you're taking baby steps, this is so new. I'm unbalanced. This is shaky ground, but you're still trying to move forward. I think there's so much more credit or weight to be given to those baby steps. We need to reframe what that means versus I'm just taking one little step forward. We're taking all fours where we have solid footing, but when you're starting to learn how to walk, you're like, what is this business? I don't know what's going on, but you still persevere. As you were taking those baby steps, right, we're going to use that, in the new way, I guess. And for me too, is baby steps in how do I look more inward in what serves me that ultimately will serve others, right? Like how can I be more honest with what I want and don't want? How can I be more honest about how to heal any trauma that I've just been managing that I didn't know was trauma per se? It's self-reflection and the honesty and really asking friends to kind of be honest with you and not just be these yes people, but also knowing and setting these boundaries of what sort of treatment or engagement or support you need in your network. If you feel like you're anxious or there's just difficulty in managing through a relationship, is that really where you need to be exerting your energy? Is this work really serving me? Am I feeling inspired and fulfilled versus just moving a widget along? If I have 10,000 hours left in my life,
Yeah.
How am I using this time?
I'm so struck by those two things, Sam. The first one around like starting to look inward to understand what serves me in my pursuit of service of others. My mom is in her 60s. She's noticed that with every decade of her life, she gives less hoots about other things. I don't think I'm all the way there yet, but this understanding of, right, like what really serves me, where do I really want to focus and what can I let go of is something that I feel really drawn to. I'm there too at the beginning, right? I've started a business. I've made a choice. I want to collectively raise the bar for how we treat ourselves. And I want to do that through coaching. I think I am in those big questions, but on a really superficial level, right? At 34, I'm also wondering at what point should I start using wrinkle cream? Yeah. So like, I want to honor the deep pursuit, but I also have some really practical questions about like,
they're valid.
What needs to change superficially.
And that's a question only you can answer, right?
Yeah.
Not falling prey to the marketing gods out there, and my thing is I don't wash my face all the time. I'm like, I should do that better, right? But it's also not falling prey to the shoulda, coulda, wouldas, that those voices in our head that will just bring us down. And
the other thing that you said is in the space of healing instead of managing trauma or what you can now identify as trauma. I'm curious for you, where in your life are you trying to make the shift? What things or themes for you are you shifting from managing to healing right now?
I think just trusting my voice and my gut more and not trying to manage myself and the expectations of others. Managing and holding myself back so someone else feels whole or unruffled, right? Yeah. Like I just need to show up how I need to show up. I can't just hold myself back so much where in the emotional gooey side of things, right? You always have to be adaptable and conscientious of how you're communicating, but what I am communicating, to be more trusting of myself to do it and not just hold back because I don't want to ruffle somebody else or worried about how they're going to receive it.
Again, right? Like I always count on you, Sam, for wholeness. My whole darn self is what I'm going from managing to trusting. As I was listening to you, I was thinking about how much that manifests for me in my sleep. I should start a tracker for this. As a former teacher, got to track everything. My sleep is really, really impacted by stress. And perhaps what I was managing manifests between 2:00 in the morning and approximately 4:00 in the morning. And I think about what it would look like to trust instead of manage more during the day. And I'm wondering now what that would do for my sleep because I'd spend more time in alignment. But I would do just about anything to sleep better consistently.
For me, and I'll be very honest, I mean, just this last year, I chose to, I should say, step away from a relationship that was 20 years in the making because I felt we were on different pages in life and understanding of each other. And I felt that I was being forced to question myself in the relationship and how I was showing up for them. I wouldn't want that on anybody, to be like, I thought I was doing right by you and you're still questioning and forgiving me, but not recognizing or understanding your portion of the relationship, right? And so it wasn't easy. And I actually engaged a friend. I'm like, am I totally missing the boat? Am I not seeing something? Like, tell me honestly, am I off base? And they're like, I don't see it. And so it wasn't like I needed to hear it from somebody else, but I just wanted, like, if I had any shadows or anything that I just wasn't seeing. And we were just at different ends of the table. This is just not in my space right now. I mean, if the universe sees fit to bring us back together, I'm open to it. But just right now, it's just adding more anxiety and drama to my life than when, there's already so much to process. I think too, it's like, that's where we have to come to terms with those boundaries. And as you don't need to continue to put the boundaries up. You put it up once. And if they still are conflict or still butting up against it without seeing their relationship to it, then that's maybe when you have to be like, hey, we need to have a chat, or we're just not on the same page here. And as unfortunate as it may feel and hurt after so many years, people grow different ways. And if they can't understand your why or your how or your what of where your life is, and they're in a different space, then maybe you just need to take a pause from each other.
When I think about that, there's so much at stake when we've lived 3-4 decades it's possible to have things that are 2 decades long.
Yeah. Just saying that out, you're like, oh my gosh, yeah.
Like it right? And so sometimes it feels like there's so much at stake when time is as invested as it has been. And it makes it harder to like make decisions, right? Because I think we learn obligation, we learn patterns of behavior. But as I think about what you're sharing, Sam, I just like hear back to that self-determination point, back to that idea of what serves me as I want to serve others. It's like kind of your North Star.
And it's a journey. It's an everyday choice, right?
Yeah.
And it's not continuing to compare myself against other people because they have their own story that I don't know the whole story. And so that too, it's like not falling prey to the shoulda, coulda, wouldas, right? Or the comparisons, but just comparing myself against myself on a daily basis. It makes no sense and it serves no one if it only sticks with me. And so, I mean, that's something too that I've learned from others is when they're honest and trusting in their own story and their voice, how they can use that to help others use their voice. It's not about finding their voice. We all have a voice. Learning how to trust that voice and to honor it and help to support others as they're learning the same for themselves.
I think as I approach this middle life, the 35 to 50 range, I'm at the cusp of a lot of like reactive, right? Get what you need, respond, grow, prove kind of space into more decide, choose kind of space. The question that I have been asking myself lately is, what is enough? Especially because I have started a business recently, I think I can give myself grace for that being a natural question. Thinking about my life as a whole, so much of my 20s and early 30s, my identity was my job. First, I was what I do. Then I was in relationship to others. And then I was me. As I age, I've been trying to add more pieces to the pie of who I am and look at them, because I notice in some aspects of my life, I take action from like a deficit mindset when really I have enough. And in other spaces, I could tap into abundance, but I'm not, because I'm diverting attention and energy. I think for me, this phase that I'm entering, I feel a strong desire to understand who I am in wholeness and understand what is an abundance and what is enough in my life, to maybe hustle less and be more still, or be more appreciative of where I am, who I have around me, what I can give. I want to be a person who has hobbies. I want to be a person who takes a nap on the weekend. I want to be a person who can drive my own joy. I want to be a person who like is in touch with my body and my mind and my feelings. And I think it takes space and time to learn how to do that, because we're so conditioned to looking externally. But that's what I kind of think this middle life is for me, is to find more me in it.
Yeah, I agree. 100%. As you're speaking, I'm like, yes, work in progress. Yes. And I think that's where I've been making those choices, those decisions, going to therapy, getting therapy for my loved ones, should I see that they need it and they're open to receiving it, doing strength training twice a week, because then I feel strong in my body and I can kind of get out of my head. And that whole enough and continuing to accumulate, it's, for me, it's a constant. Like someone had approached me to join another board. I'm like, I would love to say yes. You know, like the knee-jerk reaction is like, yeah, let's go. And then I have to practice that pause and be like, can I really serve you as best as I would want, given all of the other places that I'm boarding already, right? And that too, it's continuing to be present in who you are, practicing the gratitude, practicing that pause of, do I really need more? You know, it's funny, as an example, I was shopping, for clothes, and I came to a point where I'm like, do I really need it? And I walked by a rack without thinking I needed to buy anything. And like, that was big for me. I didn't feel this like, oh, I want to buy something because it's cute. Like, I don't need it. It's compensating for something else. And I was reading this book, and it's about the healing power of human connection in a sometimes lonely world. You become so driven and like addicted to work, accomplishments, to doing versus just being, because you're trying to compensate for a lack of feeling seen and connected, and you feel lonely in a part of your life, that you're going to find something else to fill it and feel that you have a purpose. And I'm like, okay, hand up. And again, it's like, how do I start to pivot with intention and looking to that crew, looking to friends like you to be like, take a pause, and sometimes it's just so common sense, but we need that reminder, that kind of kick in the gut, if you will, for a little bit to bring us back to center. And it reminds me, like, because I also go to the chiro to kind of make sure my body's in check. So I'm like slowly building like this crew of wellness for myself. And he's like, for chiropractic, it's like, if you think of a running stream and you have like these big rocks kind of sporadically in the middle of the stream and the water has to divert back and forth, he's like, we've essentially removed the rocks so the water can just flow seamlessly. And I think that's too, like, all these things that we engage in that are serving us, like if we go to therapy or strength training or a book club or finding those hobbies, it's getting rid of those rocks that force us to deviate and pivot and allows us to run on our track more seamlessly and with intention and purpose.
I read, similar to the being versus doing, I think I first saw this quote, or like it came very clear to me in a book called In the Flow.
Okay.
Which is about like getting in touch with your 28-day cycle as a woman. I learned so much in that book, but I think it also is in the premise of like Atomic Habits, this idea of be, do, have, and how often we think the opposite of that, right? We think, okay, once I have this income, this relationship status, this title, then I'll be able to do exercise, do date night, do whatever, right? Like fancy trips or vacations. And then I'll be happy and worldly. But the problem is when we start with have, we never end, because we get there and it's like, oh, okay, well, there's still more to have in the world. And this trick of switching to be, right? Like, I want to be happy and present. So what are the things that I should do? What would that look like for me? And then notice what comes.
It's not focusing on the tangible things. It's really focusing on the validation first, internal, versus looking for the external validation. And not in the future, I will be happy, but I am happy now.
I think for me coming into this phase of life too, it feels really important to be able to answer that question for myself, because I, as my dad would have called me, I'm like a free agent. I am married, but I don't have children and I don't have pets. And in the short term, perhaps also the long term, I don't expect either, right? So I spend most of my time making sure that I'm good, the people I love are good, but I don't have dependents. So as I seek stability and grow in who I want to be, I have the opportunity to answer that for myself in really big ways. Sometimes I have this fear of, is how I've answered it right now enough? In the access and the resources that I have, should I be doing something way cooler than I am now? And giving my self space to dream on that, especially in the pandemic. Sometimes in the pandemic, I think complacency is a mental health strategy. You can be still and do your best.
And I think too, we're conditioned in so many ways for all of the information, all the stimuli that's coming our way to, like, you should want this. You would want this to be successful, right? And everyone's term of success is their own. The question that you pose is like, what do you want to be when you grow up, is like a lifelong question. Like, who at 18 know how to answer that? What did I go to school for is totally different than what I'm doing now. I think too, it's knowing how to recognize those opportunities, knowing how to sit with those questions and not have just that knee-jerk reaction. Practice that pause. Life presents itself because you're not always going to have the right answer. You've done it before and you can figure it out again. Not sitting in despair forever, maybe giving yourself that day and then coming right back up and saying, what can we do differently next time? You're more than capable, and that you have more power in you than you give yourself credit for. Your capacity is just so much more increased when you're breathing. You're focusing on your breathing. You're focusing on something that's more rhythmic and systemic versus all the other distractions.
That reminds me of a gift a coach friend of mine gave me. It's behind me somewhere. It's called the 5-Minute Journal, and it is a morning journaling and an evening, like beginning of day, end of day journaling sequence that has lots of research and anecdotes behind it, right? The 3 questions in the morning are, what are you grateful for today? What could make today great for you? And then a couple of moments to like write a couple of affirmations, right? I am open, I am energy, what have you. And at the end of the day, it asks you to reflect back. What were 3 really amazing things that happened today? And what, if anything, do you want to shift? in the future. And I found that beginning and closing day in particular routine has been really pivotal for me in understanding who I am and what I think about myself on a daily basis. Where can I find abundance today? What I've been writing most often, I will find abundance today by doing one thing at a time. And how simple to think about, like, instead of pursuing abundance by doing a whole bunch, having a whole bunch, like by doing one thing at a time. Is how I will find my path to abundance.
They've done studies that this whole idea of multitasking actually does not serve anyone to be more productive. I know we're talking kind of more holistically in general, but I would also add that being a mom, being a Latina, a woman of color, in the nonprofit space, serving on boards, being in the community, it's also being comfortable showing up in an authentic way, in that who I am as a person speaks for me first, versus this adjective of a Latina first. There's all these stereotypes, right? If you're impassioned or you're loud, or like when you think of like a Latina, what are some keywords that come to mind, right? Or different ethnicities, what are keywords that come to mind? And you always kind of have this worry that is that stereotype, are those adjectives kind of speaking for me first, versus knowing who Sam is, and if I'm impassioned or confident about something, those other adjectives aren't speaking for me before I'm speaking for myself. It's continuing to, again, receive the feedback, hear it, but not having it change who you are, finding ways to like essentially meet in the middle and help others along that journey for themselves as well. How am I honoring your story and giving you space and grace beyond I'm only thinking of me and I'm going to treat you how I want to be treated? We don't all fit into one box. I'm more than just a mom. I'm more than just a woman. I'm more than just a woman of color. I'm right-handed, but also double jointed. I can be quiet and also be loud and boisterous, like an ambivert. The extremes are so rare of full-on introvert or full-on extrovert. But again, it's trusting ourselves, trusting our voice, working to be present, honoring our story, and feeling fulfilled in that. And it's not always the big check-a-box things, but it's the small things too.
I think talking about age is a helpful reminder for me that also they are shifting. And so to know who I was 10 years ago, today I could be different than that. 10 years from now, I could be different again. And to give myself grace in the intersecting identities that I hold. I'm more than the sum of my parts. I'm me. I do believe in this next space of life, I can find more truth in me than I've seen in all my years so far.
And I always like to think of the quote, once you know better, you do better. But there's a missing piece in the gauntlet between knowing and doing. People are like, yeah, that's great. But then there's a whole big chunk right in the middle that people forget maybe to give credence to, is the action, and is the choice to act and to apply the knowing into doing the better. Yeah, you can know it. You have to do it with an incremental intention and action to make it better, right? It doesn't just automatically happen to be better because you know it. It's something I tell my kids all the time. I'm like, well, when you know better, and then they're like, you do better. And I'm like, yes, but then we have to continue to talk about, you have to apply it. You have to put it into practice. And that's when it continues to get better. We need to pause. We need to act. We need to listen to ourselves and to others, and then act with more intention and deliberate purpose.
That gap that you're talking about, that in my opinion is where coaching is so brilliant. Because let me raise my hand as high as I possibly can and saying, I'm absolutely a person who says one thing and does another. Like I've hit my head against the same wall dozens of times, especially when it's something in service of myself. Like we all know boundaries. How many of us really do boundaries? We all know mindfulness. How many of us really do that on a daily basis? That space, right, is to understand, okay, so I know this, what's stopping me? Maybe it is a limiting belief about like women of my age can't, or interpretations of how others will receive us if we show up all the way. That's blocking, putting knowledge into action. And that's exactly where the work comes in.
You know, wasn't it, you have to try something or learn something or hear it 7 times, you know, as an adult learner for it to sink in, right? Like, why is it 7? But yeah, I mean, my friends like, just stop moving to the next thing. Just be where you are. And talking about my kids too, is like, you're not going to be Dumbledore first time you pick up a wand. You have to start somewhere, and it's going to be clunky. You're going to feel like I can't do it, but that's when you need to dig in and lean in harder and it'll start to manifest and you'll see the progress. Trust for me too has been a lifelong journey, to be quite honest. Just being burned from different relationships that I went all in on. Being able to come back and still trust is difficult, but still having kind of that purity and hope, kind of just allowing it to unfold and knowing that whatever happens, you can still persevere and find your way through. But it'll serve you in one way that you may not recognize in the moment, but in retrospect, hindsight 2020, it'll help you in some way. That
I find so much hope in that, Sam, because for me as well, if I look back on the many, probably the majority of the experiences that I've lived, including ones that were deeply challenging and heartbreaking in the moment, so much of what I've experienced has given me gifts and opportunities. And so if that's true when I look back, I have to believe it will be true for the next several decades. It gives me enough evidence points in my past to say, including when this is really frustrating, heartbreaking, or difficult, I know I will find a gift or opportunity here. And eventually I will be able to connect the dots because I've connected them before. It gives me a lot to look forward to.
Yeah. And I think that is the choice, right? Of not seeing it as I'm going to stew in the blame or, this went wrong and my life is off course, but like, okay, no, what can I take from this and do better from it? And not allow it to hold me back, but to lean in more. All those things, to trust my voice, trust my purpose in life, and doing that gratitude or abundance journal, again, recenters you and starts to change actually the construction of your brain and your synapses in a way. Those super highways just start to automatically build. It's just muscle memory in that regard, where you're like, this is how I'm focusing my life and my energy. It's like where you focus your energy, that starts to grow and manifest in the right ways. So as you move into and through middle life, what is something that would serve you to let go of? And what might be one thing that feels most important to embrace and ensure endures?
I think my answer in part is through learning what I've been doing in this daily beginning of day and closing day routine. What I would like to let go of is when I consider my day, I'd like to let go of my answer being centered on what I did or what I accomplished. And I'd like to find more often that I orient immediately to what I enjoyed. So that's something that I would like to let go of. And what I would like to embrace, I think, is more nurture in my life. Nurture for myself, nurture for what is present, not like off fishing for something else to come my way, but I think it's Adrienne Marie Brown in Emergent Strategy. I love her book. She says, what you pay attention to grows. And so I think about nurturing in that element of just nurturing what is. Yeah, that's what I would like to embrace.
That last quote that you mentioned, that's really kind of what I was trying to say earlier, is like the energy grows where your attention goes, and then choose to respond and not react. Thank you for that. For me, so as I move into and through middle life, what is something that would serve me to let go of? I think I've touched on the answer in different ways throughout our conversation today. One that I've worked on with like previous mentors, and this idea of like the 3 bucket mindset. So one bucket is, if you think of like left, middle, and far right. The far left bucket it's what we think people want us to be. And then the other end of the spectrum is what we think we need to be, kind of like the should-haves, the shoulds on either end of the spectrum. And in the middle bucket is kind of this blend of who we want to be and how we want to grow, and then how we can use kind of the support or the development or the coaching of others and how they see us, the potential in us, could blend and feed into that middle bucket as well. So it's kind of like this sandwich approach of them helping to pull, and we're pushing ourselves in that same bucket, if you will. And so for me, I think it's continuing to focus on that center bucket. And again, of like, how can I continue to grow and develop and reflect and listen to the friends, the personal board of directors, to help me reflect on what I've been doing, where my experience has been, how I want to continue to grow and develop, but help keep me centered. So both physically, mentally, emotionally, and not start to veer off in the shouldas bucket, the shoulda, coulda, wouldas. So I think that is kind of letting go of the shouldas, those extreme spectrums. And then what I want to embrace is continuing to work in that center bucket of how do I continue to recognize what I need as a person to feel fulfilled and compelled in my purpose, trusting my voice in service of others, and continuing to live in that abundant mindset and trusting that what I'm doing is enough, modeling that for my kids, for my friends, and helping to raise and support others in their own journey, and just meeting in the middle as best as we can without any expectation.
Yeah. What peace would come our way?
Mm-hmm. Yes. We can't just see life through a closed window. We need to open that window and lean out.
Yeah. Sam, I am so glad to be able to lean out of my window and high five you while you're leaning out of yours.
Yeah.
And it makes me really excited for what comes next.
Thank you for your presence here today. We invite you to keep coming back and to weave your story into legacy. Subscribe now and visit interwoven.com to sign up for our newsletter and to access more resources. This show's copyright is June of 2022. We want to thank our sponsors and affiliates as well as our producers, Teresa Kopak, Rebecca Jankowski, and Jen Gilmore of Soundfort Studios. All original music was created and performed by Gina Barrington. A special thanks to Sam and Claire for sharing their stories with us.